John, thanks for doing this.
Thanks for the invitation.
So a lot of us have been trying to figure out how we got into this war with Iran. I think the reporting is clear at this point that there was really nobody at the White House or in the American intelligence community who was telling the president, yeah, this is going to be really easy.
Right.
But he came to that conclusion anyway. There's a lot of speculation as to why. But tell us about the process. You're the president. You're trying to figure out what's going to happen if you declare war on this country. How do you find that information? Where does that come from?
Well, I can tell you how President George H.W. Bush did it and how President George W. Bush did it. It's a process.
Right.
You have to formal process. You have to commission estimates from the intelligence community. You commission finished intelligence reports from the CIA's Directorate of Intelligence. You get an idea of what the State Department is thinking about it. You're talking to your secretaries of state and defense, the National Security Advisor. But then, and I think this is even as important, you need to talk to your friends and allies. You need to know what the European countries are saying or seeing, and then our Gulf allies, the Arab allies. We really needed to engage with all of them. And then there's going to be a consensus at some point, at least among most of those countries, and then you come up with a policy. I think that that's not what took place in this case. As you know, you've heard the same criticisms that I've heard in the Gulf. The complaints are that they were not consulted as allies. They were just sort of brought along. And I was in Europe a couple of weeks ago and a couple of weeks before that, and I heard the same complaints that they weren't consulted. The only apparent consultation that was taking place was with the Israelis. And the Israelis really, really wanted this to get done.
So why would you, as a practical matter, need to consult other countries? Because there is this sense, like as an exceptional nation, we don't need anyone's permission to act. But again, not as an ideological matter or a matter of politeness or good form, but as a practical matter before launching a war, why do you need to talk to the Europeans and the Gulf states?
At the very least, you're going to want political cover. You're also going to want to give them an opportunity to come up with plan B for their, let's say, oil or gas needs or transportation issues. You don't want them to be taken by surprise because they're going to resent you in the end.
Right.
And we didn't do that. And they resent us. I'll give you an example. I was in Ireland 2 weeks ago. And at the hotel, they told me I was probably going to have to leave extra early for the airport because they were expecting the largest demonstration in Irish history, which took place the next morning. And it was all because of home heating oil prices and gasoline prices. We didn't consult with the Irish or the British or anybody else before launching this thing. They were already having problems because of the cutoff of home heating oil coming from Russia because of the Ukraine war. And then this was just doubly difficult for them. And so we figured it out. Gas was $12.50 a gallon. I mean, if you don't have
gasoline,
$12.50 a gallon, and home heating oil was astronomical to the point where people were just, freezing, and they're blaming us for it. So you want to be able to consult our friends and allies so that they have a chance to come up with a plan to make the hurt on their own people a little bit less severe.
Ireland is an enemy of Israel's. The prime minister and many cabinet ministers in Israel have said that. They hate Ireland. They hate Europe. They hate Europeans. So do you think that the president's reluctance or failure to bring them into this conversation reflects Israel's priorities?
I hate to say it, but I do, actually. I think that the Israelis, look, I understand what a close friend and ally Israel is and always has been. I get it. But I feel like sometimes we act in Israel's best interests rather than in our own best interests. I think this is one of those cases. The Israelis, of course, are going to jump up and down and yell about the Irish and the Spanish and the Italians.
Right.
But we should, let them vent and then do what's in the best interest of the United States. And I feel like we're not really doing that. We're doing Israel's bidding for it.
Have you seen this before? You said it's been a close relationship. You were for many, many years. That's true since the formation of the country, really. 1948. And there's always been pressure to help Israel go along with its priorities. But have you seen other instances when you served in government where the United States government put Israel's interests above those of the United States?
No, in fact, to the contrary, in the Gulf War, the 1990-91 Gulf War, and again in the Iraq War from 2003 onward, we specifically made decisions that were in the best interests of the United States, to the point where the Israelis complained vociferously to us that they wanted us to do A, and instead we did B, because B was better for the United States. And, we would say, well, that's foreign policy. You have your interests, we have our interests. Right. There's no such thing as permanent friends. There is such a thing as permanent interests. This is our interest, and this is what we're going to do. And that's just not, it doesn't seem to be the case today. I don't understand how attacking Iran was in U.S. national interests. I fully understand how this was in Israel's interest, and the Israelis have long wanted us to attack Iran and to overthrow the regime in Tehran. I get that. It's in their interests. But I've never believed, I don't think any CIA officer, past or present, believes or has believed that the Iranians were anywhere near a nuclear weapon. They don't have a delivery system that could deliver a nuclear weapon to the United States. And, when you've got two national intelligence estimates, a national intelligence estimate is a sense of the entire intelligence community, all 18 organizations within the U.S. intelligence community, unanimously concluding that there is no Iranian nuclear weapons program, twice, as well as the late...
There's no program.
No program. No. Ayatollah Khamenei issued a fatwa in 2003 declaring it a sin to develop a nuclear weapon. And then the CIA twice said they don't have a nuclear weapons program.
So it's interesting on that question. So the fatwa been in place all these years, more than 20 years. Mm-hmm. We're told simultaneously that Iran is a fanatical, suicidal, homicidal theocracy, totally beyond reason. So besotted are they by their crazy religious views. Mm-hmm. So there's that. But we also can't take the fatwa seriously because it's Iran and they lie all the time.
Right. But sometimes you can take things seriously.
Well, but I mean, it's one or the other. Either it's a country that issues fatwas and takes them seriously, and therefore we should be afraid of them because they're a theocracy, or it's a country that issues fake fatwas because they don't really believe in the idea of a fatwa. Like, what is it?
God forgive me for quoting Hillary Clinton, but I'm going to quote Hillary Clinton. She said when she was Secretary of State that she had come to the realization that Iran was not a theocracy. It was a military dictatorship. There was this theocratic group that sort of sat on the top of the heap.
Sure.
But the day-to-day operation of the country was run by the IRGC.
Yep.
And the IRGC, being a military organization, was going to run the country as a military dictatorship would. Right. I think we should have addressed it that way. We shouldn't have gotten wrapped around the axle on theocratic issues. We shouldn't have been afraid to engage the Iranians, or maybe not even afraid, just refusing to engage the Iranians. We should have been constantly engaged, whether it was through the Qataris or the Omanis or even the Algerians.
Right.
There were different ways in which we could speak with the Iranians, and we just never bothered. I will add, I do not have rose-colored glasses when thinking about the Iranians. I know what the Iranians have done. The Iranians made an attempt to kill me several decades ago. I haven't forgotten that. I know that they're bad guys. I know that they've carried out terrorist attacks and that they've killed Americans in many of those terrorist attacks. Yes. But we're talking single digits over the last several decades. Now, support for Hezbollah in the 80s, the 90s, yes, very bad, very big problem. The Houthis are a little bit of a thorn in our side. The Hamas thing, the CIA was late to the game on the Hamas thing because the analytic judgment for a long time was, incorrectly I might add, that the Iranians are not supporting Hamas because the Iranians are Shia Muslim and Hamas is Sunni Muslim. That was wrong. They were supporting Hamas. I get all that. But again, Hamas has never carried out an anti-American terrorist attack. So was it in U.S. national interest to attack Iran for supporting Hamas? I think not.
Hamas is designated a terror group in the U.S.?
I think just recently, it was maybe Trump 1, maybe early Trump 2, I don't recall. But I think, recently it was designated a terror.
But Hamas has never carried a terror out a terror attack against Americans?
No.
We spend a lot of time talking about Hamas.
Yeah, and the Muslim Brotherhood, which also has never carried out a terrorist attack on Americans.
Huh.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not for either one, just for the record.
No, nor am I.
But I don't have strong feelings about either one, for the record.
No.
But why do we talk about both so much?
It's been my experience. I first came to this realization when I first joined the CIA. We always have this need to have a boogeyman, whether it was, Bolshevism in the 1910s, whether it was, socialism in the 20s and the early 30s, Nazism, legitimately so. But then, in the 70s, the 80s, it became Islamism. It's like we always have to have an enemy to rally around.
So the older you get, you realize how fast everything can change. One day everything is fine, it's great, and the next day things are not great at all. That's just the nature of it. But if you're realistic about that, you have to think about your family. If something happened to you, what would happen to them? The problem is getting life insurance is not only kind of depressing, it's a huge hassle. Medical exams, paperwork, waiting weeks for approval. A lot of people just don't want to deal with it, so they don't deal with it. And that's not the right answer at all. You have an obligation to think through what would happen if you're not here. And so we're partnering with Ethos. Ethos makes getting life insurance super quick and very easy. It's 100% online. You get a quote in seconds, you apply in minutes, and same day coverage. There's no medical exam. You just answer a few very simple health questions, and you get up to $3 million in coverage. Some policies as low as $30 a month. So 10 minutes to get covered, life insurance through Ethos. You'll be glad you did. Get a free quote at ethos.com/Tucker. That's Ethos, ETHOS.com/Tucker. Obviously, application times may vary, as may rates, but it's pretty darn easy. Well, I don't know. Everywhere I go, I meet people who are addicted to drugs, who've lost loved ones. I know a bunch of people who've died of drug ODs. And I see a country that's really been gravely damaged, if not destroyed, by narcotics, which are being imported by Latin American drug cartels. If you're looking for an enemy,
there it is, right
with
there.
A death count, that seems like the one.
Oh, may I tell you a story?
I hope you will.
When I was the senior investigator on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, 2009 to 2011, end of 2011, I told the then chairman, John Kerry, I wanted to go to Afghanistan to do a formal Senate study on the heroin poppy crop, right? Afghanistan at the time was producing 93% of the world's heroin. And so I flew to Afghanistan, went to Bagram Air Base. I told them I needed to fly to Kandahar and then to Lashkar Gah, which is the capital of Helmand province. And I was doing this study. Now, as a senior congressional staff member, I had the rank of brigadier general. This is the only time in my life I ever pulled rank on somebody. And I said, they wouldn't take me down there. And I said, I'm not asking you. I'm telling you, you are going to fly me to Kandahar, and then we will fly to Lashkar Gah, and then we'll fly back to Bagram. So they relented. We went to Kandahar, did some meetings. When we got to Lashkar Gah, as you're landing, for as far as the eye could see, all you see is heroin poppy. And so I said, I want to go into the poppy fields and I want to find a farmer and I want to talk to him. So I had security, I had a translator, Pashto translator. We just drive out into the fields and sure enough, we stumble on a poppy farmer. And I asked him a very naive question. I said, instead of poppy, why don't you grow things that have 2 growing seasons like tomatoes or onions or pomegranates? Right. And he goes like this. Oh, the Americans told me in 2001 that if I told them where the Arabs were, I could grow all the poppy I wanted. I said, what Americans told you could grow poppy? And just as I said the question, my military handler pulls me by the arm and he says, we're under threat. We have to go back to the base. I never got an answer. We got back into the Jeep and they took me back to the helicopter. I flew back to Bagram. So, actually, like out of a movie. So I come back to Washington and I said to the chief investigator, I said, I'm onto something here. This is not good. So I wrote it all up just as I collected it. Well, I had a friend at DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, and I called him. I said, listen, I'm going to send you a paper, eyes only. I just want your thoughts on it before I send it to John Kerry. So he calls me back a couple days later and he says, buddy, you know you're not going to get this paper published, right? I said, why not? He said, Afghanistan produces 93% of the world's heroin. Almost all of that heroin goes to Iran and Russia, and we want them to be addicted to heroin. It weakens their societies. And I never got it published. Well, fast forward years later.
That's disgusting.
We've got a fentanyl epidemic in this country. That fentanyl is coming from China and Mexico. They want us to be addicted to fentanyl because it weakens our society. And that's why we're in the predicament that we're in.
So you believe that the U.S. government allowed poppy production in Afghanistan in order to weaken Iran and Russia?
I do. And the reason I have come to that conclusion is not because I'm any smarter than anybody else, but do you know how much of the world's heroin was produced in Afghanistan in the last year of Taliban rule, 2000?
Not too much.
Zero. None. They didn't grow any, not only did they not grow any heroin poppy in 2000, they were a net food exporter to Iran and to Pakistan. And as soon as we took over, it was all about the heroin.
So the idea that it's, that's quite amazing. That is a quite amazing statistic.
Terrible.
Does anyone in a meeting where these plans were formulated say, we're the United States, like we can't flood other people's countries with heroin. That's just so immoral.
I never sat in a meeting like that. The meetings were all about how do we win? How do we get a leg up? How do we implement the policy that we want whatever country to follow? That was it.
But if you intentionally flood other people's countries with heroin, it's kind of hard to tell yourself you're the good guy. Like that's...
Oh, Tucker, that was something that I struggled with for at least half of my career at the CIA. We're supposed to be the good guys. So why are we doing so much of this? I just never understood it.
And what do you think the answer is?
The answer was that I had stars in my eyes, that I was not fully understanding of realpolitik.
That you're a liberal. Well, I'm not a liberal at all.
Yeah,
and I find that disgusting. I find it disgusting. I don't want my government to be involved in any way in heroin trafficking.
No, nor do I.
And I also don't know why Russia's our enemy, but big picture. But even if there was a good reason to have Russia as an enemy, I still wouldn't be for flooding their cities with heroin.
Right after the Russians invaded Ukraine, I was one of 7 journalists, independent journalists who were invited to lunch with the Russian ambassador in Washington. And what he wanted was our ideas on how the U.S. and Russia could continue to cooperate diplomatically even during a time of war. And I said, I was actually proud of what I said. I went prepared. And I said, the U.S. and Russia have identical interests in counterterrorism, counterproliferation, and counter-narcotics.
Yeah.
We should never stop cooperating on those 3 issues. And I said, and you know what? There's a 4th thing. I said, Your Excellency, when you arrest a female American basketball player and give her a draconian 10-year sentence for having a little bit of weed oil, it's a bad look. That was the only time he got angry. And he said, do you have any idea how many Russians are in American prisons? 1,500. I know that it's 1,500 because I have to send my staff out to visit them. So if you want to talk about not arresting people, talk to your own government about it. Well, frankly, I would see that as an opportunity.
Yeah.
That's yet another thing on which we should be engaged with the Russian government. And we're not. And it doesn't matter who's in the White House, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican. We just have this idea that the Russians are bad, and we shouldn't be cooperating with them. I'll tell you another thing. My former wife was also a senior CIA officer. And as recently as like 2017, she said to me, the Russians are the gravest threat that the United States has ever faced. And I'm like, what newspapers are you reading? Because I know these people and they want to work with us. They're not going to roll over for us, but they want to be engaged diplomatically.
And we just won't do it. In what way?
In what way? I would be far more worried about the Chinese than about the Russians.
I'm far more worried about the Mexicans.
And the Mexicans. I'll tell you another thing too. I actually left the Democratic Party years ago because I thought that it moved too far to the right. The truth is that the ideological spectrum is not a straight line from left to right. It's a circle. And there are a lot of issues on which the right and the left can meet and agree.
Yes.
That's where I am. I'm at the point where the circle meets. So some of my former friends won't speak to me because they say I'm far too conservative, that I've gone over to the MAGA and they just don't want to be friends anymore. And that's fine. I don't care, because then they weren't real friends anyway. But the issue is, I agreed with Donald Trump's policy about building the wall. I lost a lot of friends because of that. And I said, you have to look at it this way. I read the Greek press every single day. I'm relatively recently, a dual U.S. Greek citizen now. And Turkey takes something like €1.5 billion every year to hold economic refugees in camps in Turkey until they can be processed and resettled in places like Germany and Sweden and France, etc. But what the Turks really do is they put them on little boats and they send them to Greece in the middle of the night. The purpose being to crash the Greek economy.
To destroy Greece.
Right. So what the Greeks did is they built a wall. And all of a sudden, nobody can cross the border where the wall is. So the Greeks can now focus on the islands and have the Coast Guard intercept these boats that are coming in almost every night. The wall worked. Yes, our border with Mexico is long. Much of the land is just desolate. It's desert. It's wasteland. But the wall works.
Of course. That's why Israel has them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. As the protector of your home, you know the dilemma. You want to be prepared for break-ins, but you also need to keep your firearms secure. For years, that meant choosing between a gun safe that takes forever to open in case you needed a gun, or leaving something accessible but unsafe, and neither option was a good option. And that's where we're excited to partner with StopBox. We're not exaggerating when we say using the StopBox Pro is a game changer. Here's what makes the product different. The StopBox Pro is completely mechanical, no keys, no batteries, so it never fails, it can't be subverted or hacked. The 5-button interface is designed for muscle memory. That means you get immediate access when you need it, and it keeps everyone else out. Here's something else. It's TSA compliant. You can check your firearms safely and legally when you fly, so there's no drama at the airport. Plus, it's made in the United States, no tariffs. Real American jobs and quality you can trust. Now, StopBox offers a range of products designed for an array of needs. Take the new StopBox UCAN, which uses the same mechanical system as the Pro, but is a much larger storage capacity, room for guns, ammo, targets, everything. For a limited time, our listeners get 10% off when using the code Tucker at checkout. Visit stopboxusa.com/Tucker. Use the code Tucker for 10% off the whole order. And after you purchase, feel free to mention that you've heard about StopBox from this show. No, I completely agree. So just but back to the focus of counterterrorism, really of the focus of the entire U.S. government, has been on Islamic extremism, has been on Israel's enemies for over 20 years now. You don't hear or you don't see a mobilization of men and money to fight the drug cartels, who are responsible objectively for so many more deaths in our country.
Exactly right.
So does anyone ever bring that up and say, wait a second, we have 100,000 people dying a year because of these
On the contrary, the CIA has something called it used to be called the Counter-Narcotics Center. Now it's called the Crime and Narcotics Center. And that is the graveyard where people's careers go to die. Yeah, the CIA doesn't care about stopping the flow of drugs. They just don't care. You know, this wonderful show on Netflix, Narcos.
Yes.
So in seasons 1 and 2, just as the DEA is going to go in and grab Pablo Escobar or grab the gentleman of Cali, the CIA station chief comes in and just screws the whole thing up. That's in that show because that's what happens in real life. The CIA at the time cared only about communism and stopping communism. And if the drug cartels were going to tell the CIA where the communists were hiding, then the CIA was A-okay with the drug cartels. And that attitude has really never changed.
Why do you think that is? It doesn't make any sense.
It's old think, Tucker. It's old think, where instead of saying, our job is to disrupt any threat to the United States.
Yes, that's what I thought the job was.
Mm-hmm. Their view is our job is to disrupt any Islamist, communist, fascist, whatever foreign official challenge to the United States, whether it's governmental or it's an organized terrorist group. They're just not thinking about the cartels.
So it sounds like they're doing what all organizations do ultimately, which is to protect themselves.
Yes, it's all about kingdom building. I will say, I wrote a piece, I don't even remember for whom, when President Trump first declared that the drug cartels would be reclassified as foreign terrorist groups. And everybody was laughing and making fun and how silly this was. I said, no. You're underestimating him. He knows exactly what he's doing. He's not doing this for the PR of naming the cartels as terrorist groups. He's doing it because legally it frees up some agencies' abilities to act unilaterally against the cartels, and it frees up a great deal of money to be used by CIA, NSA, DOD against the cartels. I said, this is a big deal. This is not window dressing.
Did it have any effect?
I think not yet.
Yeah.
Not yet. Frankly, the army of people that we put against terrorism after 9/11 is what we need to do against drugs.
It's hard to think that could happen now, considering that all resources of government, certainly all attention in government, is focused on this Iran war.
I think that's the most important point. Yes, I agree.
That there's just no bandwidth for anything.
Nope.
And the demands of a war, especially one that you're losing, which we are, by any real measurement, they're so overwhelming. Like there's no time to think about anything else. Correct?
In the 91 Gulf War and in 2003, the State Department initiated this policy called burden sharing. Really, what it is was a nice way of saying we want all of our allies to pay for this, but it worked. The Kuwaitis in 1990, the year that they were invaded by Iraq, for the very first time in their history, they made more from their investments than they made from oil. So they had this bottomless pit of money. They paid for most of the liberation of their own country, but the Europeans also paid. And so it ended up not costing us anything. We went down the burden sharing road again in 2003, and a lot of it came out of our own pockets, but our European and Gulf allies also paid for it. This time, nobody was consulted. And so this is all coming from our own pockets. And I think that's unsustainable over the long term.
To the beginning of it, the president said, well, two things. One, that we destroyed Iran's nuclear program in June. But you're saying that
obliterated it.
That there was no nuclear program.
There was no nuclear program. They had partially enriched uranium, certainly, which under the NPT, they're allowed to do. It's subject to United Nations inspection. They were not.
But there was no nuclear program in June.
No nuclear weapons program.
So nuclear weapons program, right. So we destroyed the nuclear weapons program, which doesn't exist. But then in February, we were told again that the nuclear weapons program is absolutely real, that the threat is imminent.
Yes.
People go on television, on Fox News, and say Iran can lob an ICBM into Miami and obliterate the United States.
I'm glad that you brought that up too, because that is also not true. And a lot of people are saying it. The Iranians did something recently that was interesting, in that they took two of their medium-range missiles. They stripped them down to the point where it was just the missile and the engine, and that was it. There was nothing inside of them, just to see how much distance they could get. And they made it almost to Diego Garcia, which is far. So if you instead point them toward Europe, yes, without anything inside these missiles, they could reach Western Europe. That's not a delivery system. That's just smoke and mirrors. They can only go that far if they're completely empty. If you weigh them down with explosives, or God forbid with nuclear material, even if it's just to make a dirty bomb, they can't get that far. They could get to Cyprus. They could get certainly to Israel and easily to the Arab Gulf countries. But there was no threat to the United States.
So the IC, the American intel community, those 18 agencies you referred to, did anybody in those agencies say to the president, this is a major threat, the nuclear program in Iran?
The people that I still talk to at the agency say specifically, no.
No. So that information, that lie, came from Israel?
Yes.
Right. Why would a president believe a foreign intel agency before his own?
I don't know. That's really the $64,000 question. You recall in the first term when President Trump met with Vladimir Putin, he did not take his intelligence people into the meeting with him. Putin took his intelligence people into the meeting with him because the president said he trusted the other side's intelligence people more than he trusted his own. And I get it. I get that he believes that he was under direct threat from, the deep state and the John Brennans of the world. I understand that. But I'm surprised that feeling, that belief has held over all this way into the second term, where you would believe the Israeli information before you would believe your own people's information, especially when you know that the Israelis have a vested interest in you doing their dirty work for them.
What about General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff? So this is someone who I think I know the president likes, certainly speaks well of. He would be informed on this, right? The chairman has a pretty clear readout on what the intelligence is, right?
Yes. I'm glad you brought him up. I wanted to bring him up too. We have some mutual friends. And not only have I never heard a single negative ever about General Kane, I hear only the most superlative things.
Yeah, me too.
That he is the best chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff that the country could hope for right now. But we also hear these leaks into the political press in Washington that he has argued against this war from the very beginning. It was my own experience.
I don't believe that's true.
I hope that I'm right. I hope that I'm right. It was my experience at the CIA that the Joint Chiefs were the last ones to go to war.
Yep.
They were the ones that always argued until the bitter end not to attack Iraq in 2003 because there was no exit strategy. I think that's the problem today. There's no exit strategy. It's easy to invade a country. It's easy to overthrow a government. It's very, very difficult to leave and to leave something that can actually function as a government.
Now, a lot of people hesitate before getting traditional therapies for cholesterol health. They don't want to wind up stuck on capsules for the rest of their lives. Pills, they'd rather feel like they have some say in how they take care of their own bodies. And that's why more Americans are turning to more gentle alternatives with ingredients they recognize. Ingredients like ginger and pomegranate. One of those alternatives is a Dose for Cholesterol. Dose for Cholesterol is a clinically backed cholesterol support supplement that targets triglycerides, LDL, HDL, and total cholesterol levels. We know a bunch of people use it, and the results have been overwhelming. They no longer fear having blood work done because at last the results are good and they're not on some kind of weird chemical cocktail. It actually works. We wouldn't partner with them if it didn't work. Dose is easy to use. It's a daily 2-ounce liquid shot that tastes like mango. Ooh. No capsules, no powders. It's seamless to use. Visit dosedaily.co/Tucker. Use code Tucker for 35% off. That's dosedaily.co/Tucker, code Tucker for 35% off. It's worth it. You want to hear an interesting coincidence? I'm sure it's just a coincidence, but on 9/11, on the actual day, September 11th, there were 4 planes. 2 hit the World Trade Centers, 1 hits the Pentagon. The 4th, which was late, Flight 93, wound up crashing in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. We know that the vice president gave an order to shoot that plane down because, understandably, by the way, believed it was headed into Washington, which I think it was.
Yes.
4 American fighter jets were scrambled from D.C., chased that plane, and the story was, their explanation was, we didn't get there in time, and the plane was brought down instead by Todd Beamer and the other passengers, famously. Of those 4 fighter jets, of the pilots of those 4 fighter jets, they were National Guard pilots, 2 became generals.
Wow.
And one of them is Dan Kane.
I did not know that.
Yeah, it's not widely known, but it's a fact.
Wow.
What are the odds of that?
Not good.
I don't know anything beyond what I just said, but I just think that's such an interesting fact.
Wow.
So, okay, let's say you're and I've never heard a bad word about General Kane, other than he did not take a strong position on the Iran war before it started.
I'd be very disappointed in that.
I believe that's a fact. I think there's a lot of backfilling going on through leaking, but when it came down to it, General Kane did not say this is a bad idea. He did not say that. In fact, he said it's not my job to say things like that. My question to you is it his job to say things like that? Like if you're him, if you're a senior briefer, if you're John Ratcliffe at CIA or any of the people who advise the president on foreign policy questions, wars, what's your view of what they should say to him? If you think this is a terrible idea, should you say that?
At the CIA, that's an easy one to answer. The CIA is not supposed to be a policy organization. It's supposed to be a policy support organization. So the CIA director should never take a position on things like that. They do, obviously, but they're not supposed to. When George W. Bush was president, in his second term, he changed the structure of the PDB, the President's Daily Brief. It used to be, for most of the articles, it would be a paragraph of fact and a paragraph of analysis. He ordered a third paragraph to be added, policy recommendation. And it was like setting the building on fire. Nobody wanted to be responsible for telling the president of the United States what he should do about a policy. That's just not what the CIA was created for. Behind closed doors, of course, they're going to offer advice. When I was there, the Joint Chiefs almost always deferred to the Secretary of Defense, but they were also almost always of one mind. When we attacked Iraq in 2003, there was a very significant split where it was the Office of the Vice President, the Office of the Secretary of Defense, and the NSC that were the pro-war faction.
Right.
And the anti-war faction.
The political people.
The political people. Crazy as it sounds, well, maybe not crazy. CIA, State Department, and Joint Chiefs that were opposed to the war.
I'm not surprised at all. I'm not surprised at all. I will never defend the CIA. However, like Mossad, they're a stakeholder in the country.
Yeah.
It probably shouldn't be, but they are.
Yeah, right.
And so sometimes the voices of restraint come from the people with the long-term interest in the state.
Mm-hmm. I think that's right.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that does not surprise. And I'm not complimenting the CIA.
No.
I
know in the
them.
Chat I'm going to be accused of being a shill for the CIA, which I'm not.
I mean, when the Israelis bombed Doha on September 10th, the day before, September 9th, I guess, the day before Charlie Kirk was murdered, that was like lunatic. It was a lunatic thing to do, to bomb, one of our closest allies in the world. Yeah, it was insane. And Mossad did not participate in that because they thought it was reckless.
Which it was.
Oh, it was bonkers. But so Mossad was a voice of restraint in Israel, which is like hard to get your head around. But does that surprise you?
No, because you always have to consider the potential for blowback. Mm-hmm. Unintended consequences, responses that you haven't fully thought through. Yeah, blowback is a problem.
So what kind of blowback is the United States looking at now that we've killed the religious leader of this country and his family?
Yeah.
We haven't had a problem with Shiite terrorism in the United States during my lifetime or ever.
No.
Are we going to have one now?
I think not, only because it's always been so hard for Iranians or Iranian proxies to get visas to come to the United States. So, these rumors, I think they came from the FBI right after the conflict began, that there's a cell in Honolulu, there's a cell in Detroit. No, there aren't. If there were, you'd just grab them instead of
I was about to say, why are you telling me about cells? Shouldn't you be arresting the cells if they're planning terror?
Exactly. I remember when I was still with the CIA, driving down First Avenue in New York, and with two FBI agents, one of them said, "You see that storefront? That's the headquarters of Hezbollah's cell in New York." And I said, "Well, why don't you do something about it? They're a terrorist group."
What did he say?
Taking me on a tour for? Just go kick the door down and grab them if it's the headquarters of Hezbollah's terrorist cell. No, they just kept driving. Like I didn't understand. Yeah, but I think that the attack on Iran has galvanized the Iranian public. The government was not a house of cards. We're not going to be seen as liberators. We're going to be seen as attackers and possibly occupiers. And I think that's the most immediate challenge we're going to face.
So that, I guess, seems obvious now, 7 weeks in. But at the time, my impression is the president really believed that if you kill the Ayatollah, the whole country collapses.
But coming back to Hillary Clinton, the reason why it didn't is that it's not actually a theocracy. It's a military dictatorship.
Oh, it's actually one of the most liberal countries in the entire region.
You know what? It is. I think you and I are the only ones who haven't been.
People who know that.
Yes, and we haven't been to Iran. So many of my friends have been to Iran relatively recently, before the hostilities began. And they posted videos on YouTube of just walking down the street in Tehran, and the restaurants are open and the cafes, and there's music and people laughing and having late dinners, and it's just normal life.
Yeah. No, I remember my father working in Iran, going back and forth to Iran, and telling me, no, it's like Tehran specifically.
Yes.
I mean, I think it's a huge country, but Tehran, it's tons of liberals.
Yeah.
And one of the most amazing pictures, I think that's one of the reasons Trump was convinced that the regime would fall, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there were lots of, secular liberals in Tehran.
Yes.
But one of the most amazing pictures I think I've ever seen was a picture of a very butch-looking lesbian-type woman with a nose ring in Tehran, standing at an intersection, waving a photograph of the Ayatollah after he was killed. And the point is, this is exactly the person who opposed him while he was still alive. But now that we've killed him, you got all the lesbians of Tehran are all of a sudden for the Ayatollah.
I think that's exactly right. We've forced them together. We really have.
So
you look at it this way: if I don't like whoever happens to be in the White House, and I go to demonstrations and my fist is in the air, and I don't like this person's policy, and then the Russians attack, I'm going to pick up a gun and I'm going to fight the Russians.
Oh, for sure. No matter who attacks, of course.
No matter who attacks.
Right, but human nature gets suspended for our adversaries because they're not human beings. So they're not going to behave in ways that we would recognize. They're totally irrational. It's a suicide cult or whatever they're telling you on Fox News. But the point is that you will suspend all rational analysis, and because you can't predict people like that other than they want to kill.
You're right. And when the only analysis that you're getting or paying attention to is from either the Israelis or the MEK, the Mujahideen Khalq, which is really no more than a quasi-communist cult, then you can't rely on the information.
Okay, so can you explain the MEK? So
sure.
there are big allies in Iran, right?
Yeah, which just sends chills up my spine.
Okay, so who are they?
So they were founded by a husband and wife team back in the 60s. And in the 70s, they were based in Iraq, northeastern Iraq, and they would launch these cross-border attacks into Iran. Deep into Iran, like in Tehran, terrorist attacks. They attempted to murder the American ambassador. They attempted to murder a 3-star general who was the senior-most American military official in Iran. They've carried out anti-American terrorist attacks over the course of decades.
Anti-American.
And then they switched sides. When Saddam Hussein pushed them out of Iraq, they relocated mostly to Paris. Yeah. Now, the husband disappeared.
It's always Paris.
Always Paris.
Well, that's where the Ayatollah Khomeini lived until 1979.
For years.
Yeah.
And that's where the Greek, what became the Greek terrorist groups, 17 November and Popular Revolutionary Struggle, they started in Paris.
That's where Pol Pot started.
Pol Pot
Paris.
Studied in Paris.
Yep.
And Karl Marx's daughter married Paul Lafargue, the father of French communism. So Paris is kind of a screwed up place. It can be. Anyway, Miriam Rajavi's husband vanished, never to be seen again. The conventional wisdom is that she killed him or had him killed, and she took over the MEK. So in 2009, when Barack Obama is elected president, Hillary Clinton becomes God forbid, becomes Secretary of State. The MEK hires some of the most high-powered lobbyists in Washington to get them off the terrorism list. And they engaged with both Democrats and Republicans. I mean, everybody from Howard Dean to Rudy Giuliani.
Howard Dean was lobbying for MEK?
Oh, yeah. And Rudy Giuliani.
That's pathetic.
You should see the pictures of them together. It's sickening. At these big banquets in Washington to raise money for the MEK.
These are the people who tried to kill the U.S. ambassador?
Mm-hmm. But they're the good guys now.
So the weather is warming, which means grilling is here, and you're probably already thinking about your first backyard barbecue of the year. What should you put on the barbecue? We recommend Good Ranchers. We've been using Good Ranchers for a while, and the difference is obvious. They partner with local American farmers and ranchers to deliver 100% American meat right to your door. Pasture-raised, no antibiotics, no added hormones, and excellent quality and taste. Good Ranchers also just launched their new custom boxes. So instead of choosing a predetermined list of meat choices, you can build your own box with the cuts that you want. Steaks for grilling, chicken for weeknight dinner, whatever. You decide. You start your plan, you get to choose a free meat that included with every order at no additional cost. Plus, with the code Tucker, you get $25 off your first order. That's free meat with every order and $25 off your first order. Use the code Tucker to get that. GoodRanchers.com, American meat delivered, and it's excellent.
So, and I'm sure they did it by saying, we're the enemy of Israel's enemy, therefore we're your friend.
That's exactly what the argument is. And so they got themselves off the terrorism list. They pay millions of dollars to DC lobbyists, senior political figures, former political figures, and now can accept American weapons. Well, the MEK doesn't have the wherewithal to fight the Iranian government. It's just all about arming themselves.
What do they believe?
They're ardently communist.
And and Howard Dean and Rudy Giuliani were lobbying for them?
Because remember, the Iranian regime is this theocratic terrorist cabal, and we have to overthrow them to make the Middle East safe. It's insane.
I know very little about MEK other than what you've said, but I do know that they are feared.
Yes.
And I know that
they're murderous.
Yes. And it's suspected, because I've heard this from intel people, that they are used basically as assassins for hire.
Well, the conventional wisdom is that the Israelis use the MEK regularly to carry out these assassinations we've seen over the years in Tehran.
Yeah. And I have heard, I don't know if it's true, in the United States.
Oh.
So that was, and I heard that from someone who's pretty informed. Doesn't mean it's true. Of course, it's hard to know what is true now, but but the MEK is taking money from Israel.
Yes, lots of money. Mm-hmm.
And I think most people who pay attention think the MEK is like a reasonable pro-America group.
Right. From the very beginning when they were rehabilitated in 2009, I just started shaking my head like, what are we doing? What are these Obama people thinking? But it turned out it wasn't just the Obama people. The MEK, first of all, had the money to hire all these multi-million-dollar lobbyists. And they were smart in that they did it across the political spectrum. Democrats and Republicans. From rich Iranian exiles who were willing to hold their nose over the personal ideology of the organization and just say, well, if you're going to kill Ayatollahs and Hujjatul Islams, then okay, I'll write you a check.
And the Israelis, of course, see them as useful.
Yes.
That's quite amazing. What about the Shah's son, who we've also been trained to think of as a good guy?
Yeah.
Reza Pahlavi.
He is most definitely not a good guy.
So who is he? So he's the son of the Shah who was deposed famously in 1979.
Correct. And when his father was deposed, he was only 19 years old, 18, 19 years old. So he came to the United States with his family. The Shah got sick almost as soon as he came to the United States. He developed cancer. He was treated in, I think it was in Houston. The Iranian government under the Ayatollahs objected so vociferously that they raided the American embassy and took our diplomats hostage, held them for 444 days.
We told the Shah to go get cancer treatment somewhere else.
That's right. He went to the Bahamas for a while, then to Panama, and then ended up finally settling in Cairo, and he died in Cairo. Well, his family stayed here in the United States, both in Northern Virginia. Well, Reza Pahlavi, the crown prince in Northern Virginia, the mother in North Carolina, and Reza's younger brother in Boston. Reza Pahlavi is not equipped to lead anything. He is a playboy. He had an affair with his brother's wife. His brother his brother turned to drugs and committed suicide. His own wife, Reza Pahlavi's wife, is having a very public affair right now with her personal trainer. The Parisian press is just crazy over it, and they have pictures. They publish pictures of the two of them together all the time. It's humiliating in anybody's culture, let alone in Iranian culture, which is supposed to be very pious and very Muslim. So on top of that, he has said repeatedly, most recently on the Patrick Bet David podcast, that no, He doesn't think he wants to go back to Iran. He's made a life here. He's very wealthy. His kids are Americans. There's really no reason to go back to Iran. Okay, so why are we talking about you then in the first place?
Well, he was all over Mar-a-Lago and the White House.
I'm the guy. And then, well, maybe I'm not the guy. I'm kind of afraid.
So what has he done for the last 47 years?
Nothing. You see him every once in a while at cultural events. You see him every once, twice a year. Iranian singers will come to Washington, or there will be a Farsi language play, a performance or something, and he'll go to those things. But he's just not a player in Washington, even in Iranian exile.